Welcome to the Martin Bailey Photography Podcast. It's April 30, 2021, and this is episode 739. A few weeks ago, I mentioned that I had planned to, at some point, photograph some of the cups and bowls that my wife and I have collected over the years. A number of you mentioned that you'd like to see them, so yesterday afternoon I took my camera, a few lenses, and my tripod downstairs along with a medium-sized collapsible reflector and spent a few hours making those photographs. I used only ambient light and occasionally popped in a little bit of golden light from a gold reflector, but at ISO 100 most of the exposures were between a half a second and just over a second. It was late afternoon on an overcast day, and we had our lace curtains drawn. As I think you'll see from the photographs, this does produce quite a soft light that I'm quite happy with. I didn't go over the top on positioning the pieces. I will talk about my thought process as we go through these, but keep in mind that my main goal was to show you these pieces beautifully. But I didn't run off and get a bottle of sake to pour into them or anything like that. That would have resulted in me drinking the sake, and the rest of my working day would have gone down the toilet. I experimented with both my RF 50mm f1.2 lens and the EF mount 100mm macro lens. I ended up using only the macro lens because of the narrower angle of view. I wanted to use shallow depth of field so that you could see the colour of the wood on our dining table and the wood on our kitchen cabinet, which houses most of the crockery we own. Some of it is boxed up and stored away and occasionally gets rotated, but the majority of what we use regularly is in the cabinet next to our dining table. Anyway, I have selected 15 images, though not all of them have anything special to add, so I'll break my usual 10 photos per episode rule and we'll blast through all 15 today. Here is the first photo that I shot of my 3 sake cups, otherwise known as guinomi. Guinomi is usually used to describe a slightly larger sake cup, and the name is related to a hearty drinking style. Ochoko is another word for a sake cup that you may have heard, but they are usually slightly smaller and used to drink sake in a more refined and gentle manner. It's kind of like the difference between guzzling and sipping the drink. Personally, I prefer the former drinking style, and that's why I have these guinomi. You'll notice that there is a slightly lighter area in the wood that forms a kind of halo around the top of the centre and left cups. That's actually the back of my chair, just visible over the surface of the table. I left it there to provide a little variation, and although it's very blurred, I think it adds to the domestic situation slightly. This is the only shot in which I included that base from what I think is the Tokoname kilns, which we bought at the Tokyo Tableware Festival at Tokyo Dome a number of years ago. After that, I switched between 3 placemats that I bought from a department store here in Tokyo, purely for photography purposes. We've never actually used these when setting the table. Here is the almost black one with the same 3 cups. I'm afraid we can't remember where the center guinomi was made. We bought it at the Tableware Festival too, but the name escapes us. The black cup on the left is Kuro Oribe. Oribe is a famous group of kilns, and the vessels from there are usually the signature green of the Oribe cup on the right. Kuro just means black, and added to the name when the Oribe is not green. I should also mention the concept of wabi-sabi, which is what put me onto the topic of shooting these cups and bowls in the first place. In Japanese aesthetics, wabi-sabi basically means beauty in imperfection. These cups are intentionally rough, not straight, and as you see in this case, downright gnarly. But that right there is what makes them so beautiful. You'll notice this in pretty much all of the pieces that I'll share with you today. I won't mention the shooting data for all of these images, as you can see that by clicking or tapping on the image and opening them in the Lightbox. But just to get us started, I was using my 100mm macro lens at f2.8 with a 0.8 second shutter speed, so you can tell that there was very little light. With a well-chosen shutter speed though, essentially just exposing to the right of the histogram as I always do, it is nice soft light, which I always enjoy shooting in. Note too that while using these placemats with lines on them, I was relatively careful to ensure that they were in line with the lens axis so that the whole thing didn't look skewed. This next cup is for drinking shochu, which is a clear alcohol that comes in various grades from paint stripper cheap to incredibly expensive. Shochu can be made from just about anything, though wheat and rice-based shochu is common, and I've also seen it made with corn, potatoes, and many other ingredients. My favorite, and a drink that I easily drink more than sake, is so-called imojochu. Imo means potato, but in this instance it actually means sweet potato, and creates a type of shochu that is much more of an acquired taste. When I first tried imojochu around 17 or 18 years ago, the first glass I tried was horrible. Fortunately, the alcoholic content kicked in, and the second glass was much better. By the time I'd finished my third glass that evening, I was a convert. I bought this cup directly from the person that made it at a department store here in Tokyo. I fell in love with this instantly, and although it was a little over $50, I couldn't prevent myself from buying it. One of the selling points was that single red dot that you see in this photo, but I liked the overall design. And when I peered into the cup, I found the white base mesmerizing. I was both surprised and completely not surprised when the person told me that his kiln was Taisetsugama, right by the Taisetsu mountain range in Hokkaido. This next cup is made of a section of bamboo, treated with the lacquer also used for lacquerware. But here they've left the organic feel of the bamboo, and the lacquer almost has a matte feel to it. I use this one more often than not when I want to drink sake, as in Japanese rice wine, from a larger cup than my guinomi that we looked at earlier. I generally use the guinomi when I sit with a bottle, so that I can fill it up more often. But when I'm drinking something chilled or maybe relatively cheap sake from a carton, I will just pour it into this larger cup, and then I don't have to sit with the bottle or cart. This cup is very light, and you have to wash and dry it after use. You can't, for example, as we often do with cups used at the end of the day, just fill this with water and leave it to soak, then wash it in the morning. When I use this cup, I have to wash it as soon as I've finished using it, then dry it with a paper towel and put it back into our cabinet. One of the things that I fell in love with this cup is the base, which I included in this photo. As you can see, the craftsman that makes these simply leaves the natural segments that form inside the bamboo to form the base of the cup. You can generally see where these sections are from the lines seen from the outside, so they must be cutting them just at the right point to make use of this base and leave the top open. Very long-time listeners might recall a commercial shoot that I did around 12 years ago when I drove all the way up to one of the northernmost prefectures of Japan and spent 2 days photographing a man that farmed trees to scrape lines in their bark and collect the sap, which was then used to make the traditional Japanese lacquerware. The town was called Joboji and is famous for high-quality lacquer and lacquerware. While on that job, I visited one of the craftsman workshops where the lacquerware is made and spent over $200 on each of these 2 lacquerware bowls. Luckily, my wife loves them as much as I do, so I got away with the hefty purchase, but these have become one of our household treasures. I love how there is a little bit of black lacquer showing through in areas in the red bowl, but that deep, rich black and the texture of the black bowl is simply beautiful to me. In English, when we want to describe very deep black, we might say pitch black or black as pitch. In Japan, the word for very dark black is shikoku, and that means literally the very dark lacquerware black that you see here. I should also note that although the red bowl might be considered slightly wabi-sabi with the black showing through, the black bowl is perfect in every way. To get that dark black, the bowl would have been carefully milled, then sanded smooth, then the lacquer applied, then allowed to dry and polished and lacquered again up to 30 times to get it that perfect. By contrast, these bowls in the next photograph that my wife bought are relatively inexpensive, but also some of our favourite pieces. They're just fun to use for small items that we might put on the table, such as, for example, a bowl of sugared black beans that might end up as our dessert after a meal. So that I could shoot these from above, I put the placemat on the floor and just pointed my camera down at them. This is one of the shots where I used a gold reflector to the right to bounce a little bit of warm light back in to what would have otherwise been pretty dark shadows. Here also is the same 3 bowls back on the table so that you can see their shape from the side and that they're actually tripods. They have 3 little feet, which I think is quite cute. Thinking about it, these are from Okinawa when we visited 10 years ago now to do a workshop. My wife went out with a friend's wife and picked these up while I was teaching my Pixels to Pigment workshop. A good find that we both enjoy a lot. These next 2 bowls are also lacquerware from the city of Aizu in Fukushima. These were about half the price of the Joboji bowls and have a more down-to-earth feel about them. You might not be surprised to hear that we have never actually eaten from the Joboji bowls, but we use these 2 pretty regularly. After cooking most of our meals for the last 25 years, my wife is frankly tired of cooking. She doesn't really like me to get into the kitchen, so I don't get permission to cook for us very often either, which means that we sometimes rely on takeouts and convenience store bentos, but it's a good way to keep stress levels down. When she does cook though, she always does a really good job of selecting the best bowls to serve each dish in, and it's always a pleasure to see what she's selected. The 3 little bowls that you see in this next image are inexpensive again, but we really like the simple design and how the smaller bowls fit away nicely, nested inside the larger ones. These are often used to serve some shichimi or 7 spice to put into noodles, another favourite dish. You'll notice that the painted lines aren't perfect, but again, even in these regular kitchen bowls, we get a sense of the Japanese wabi-sabi that I mentioned earlier. It's that beauty in imperfection that we enjoy so much. I also shot my 3 Guinomi cups individually, but as I've already talked about these, I'll just drop them into the webpage for this post at mbp.ac/739, just in a gallery so that you can take a look. To finish with, here are 2 soba choco, again from the Oribe kiln, hence that signature green colour. You'll see that they've broken up the monotony a little with those amoeba-like forms in the design, which we found quite appealing. The word soba means buckwheat noodles, and choco is the cup, the same as ochoko, which is just adding the honorific o to the word for a small cup. These are what you put the dip in for the noodles, often with some thinly sliced onions and broken up nori, the dried seaweed that you often see wrapped around rice balls or onigiri. Okay, so we'll wrap it up there. We have a heap more of these kind of bowls and things, and we only concentrated on Japanese vessels. If I start on our Western style crockery, I'd need a few more episodes, but it's not as interesting as this Japanese stuff, which I hope you enjoyed seeing. I think I've captured the warmth of our home in these images to a degree too, so I hope that comes across. I'm incredibly thankful for the life we have and the way my wife makes everything so special. I'm lucky to have her in my life to make it richer and so much more fun. Thanks very much for listening today. If you enjoy this podcast, please share a link with your friends. Subscribe in iTunes or your favourite podcast program to ensure uninterrupted delivery. If you have a moment to rate the podcast or leave us a review in iTunes, that helps to keep us relevant in the huge number of podcasts out there now. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter and LinkedIn, and links to everything that I'm up to are at martinbaileyphotography.com, so do drop by and take a look. I'll be back next week with another episode, but in the meantime, you take care and have a great week, whatever you're doing. Bye bye.